Okay, everyone. So nice to see you all again here. And tonight I'm gonna continue from the meditation talk, not the meditation talk, the Dhamma talk I gave here a couple of weeks ago. Were you here a couple of weeks ago? Some of you were? Okay. Some of you were not. That's all right. Even if you weren't here a couple of weeks ago, then you still probably get the gist of what I'm going to talk about tonight, because every Dhamma talk is kind of self-sufficient and stands on its own two legs, or how many legs a Dhamma talk actually has, I'm not sure. So the last 2 weeks ago, I talked about the idea of how there is no free will according to the Buddhist teachings. And that is kind of a very challenging teaching. And many people, they might lose faith in the Dhamma at that point. They say, of course, there has to be free will. It's hard to reconcile sometimes with our experience of ourselves and experience of the world. But if we grant that to the Buddha, and the way the Buddha talks about this in the suttas, he says that you cannot choose your choices. You don't decide your decisions. You don't will your will. The will is something that comes from the past. It comes from cause and conditions. It comes from all the kind of the circumstances and influences on us. It is not actually something that comes from some independent reality, which is the me or the I inside. And if the Buddha is right about that, and let's assume for a moment that he is right, and even if the Buddha is not entirely right about that, even if he's unsure, at the very least, I'm sure we can all agree that to a very large extent, our choices are conditioned. They're not kind of freestanding or independent realities in the world. It's kind of very obvious that they have to be conditioned. We have habits, we have ways of doing things, we've grown up in a certain culture in a certain way, and we are obviously conditioned by that. But so what does that mean? And what it means, it actually has very important consequences if there is no free will. I heard to my horror, sometimes you get horrified when you hear too much, things go into the ear and what you hear is not very useful, or it's kind of wrong ideas. I heard to my horror one of the kind of great modern scientists, and he was asked about the idea of free will. And he said, well, it doesn't really matter whether there's free will or not, because we act as if there is free will anyway, so who cares if there's free will or not? It doesn't really make any difference. And I think that is a completely wrong way of understanding things. It's kind of nice sometimes. When you lean on the Dhamma of the Buddha, sometimes you can kind of stand your ground against some of the most famous, people in the world. Some of these so-called brilliant people, sometimes they have wrong ideas because they are missing some fundamental insight into the nature of the world. The sort of insight that the Buddha had that actually overturns things and make you see things in a radically different way. And so my response to that scientist would be, actually, no, that is misunderstanding that it doesn't make any difference. It actually makes a massive difference. And the reason why it makes such an important difference is that the moment you understand that you are not independent of circumstances and conditions, that you actually are fully a result, your decisions are fully a result of those causes and conditions, at that moment, you understand how important it is to get the right conditions. So that becomes another condition that influences your will. That does not mean you have free will, it just means that there's another condition that influences your will, the condition of understanding that your will is conditioned. Sorry about that, that's just... you get the gist of what I'm saying, right? That becomes another condition. And of course, the moment you grasp that, you start to understand how incredibly important it is to get influenced by the right people, to get wise input in your life, to have someone who understands about life, to actually give you that input that enables you then, or enables you, or enables the conditions, or enables whatever, to make the right decisions down the track. So make sure that you get that good conditioning in your life, because that is going to then enable you to head in the right direction, because that is how we end up making good decisions. And of course, from a Buddhist point of view, that means that you get affected by the Dhamma. Yeah, you get conditioned by the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. That is what you allow then to kind of work themselves into you and to become the driving force in your life. This is what we call sammaditthi in the Pali language, right view. Yeah, the right outlook, seeing things in the right way. And as we do that, as we see and perceive the world in the right way, that becomes the input which then makes our choices better, choices that actually lead to happiness, choices that may lead to an end of suffering, choices that lead us in the right direction, instead of leading us to more of the same, to more of that eternal merry-go-round, which is the samsaric existence of human beings. So there's a very profound consequence to these things, understanding these things in the right way. It does not mean that it's just business as usual. No, it means that we think about the world, we think about our place in it in the right way. And so, so basically someone like the Buddha, the Buddha was a very happy person. Some of the teachers you meet even in the present day, very happy people. It's kind of obvious that they have understood something that the majority of people have not. Okay, so maybe their brainwashing must be a good one. So I'll go with their brainwashing, their conditioning, because they seem to have grasped something profound. And this is how we then add that wisdom to our lives. So that's why in the suttas, the word of the Buddha, one of those very interesting things that I love to mention, because it's so kind of counterintuitive to how we think about the world. And this is where Venerable Ananda is very famous for being the Buddha's number one attendant. He attended on the Buddha for about 20 years or something, looking after the Buddha all the time, very diligent. He had the foremost memory at that time, so he was able to memorize all the teachings of the Buddha. That's thanks to him in a large part that we have all the suttas that we have today. And that's probably also one of the reasons why he became the attendant to the Buddha, because he had that incredible ability in memorizing things. So one day is Venerable Ananda. Ananda, by the way, means, you know what it means? Bliss. Yeah, bliss, joy, happiness. Yeah, is that Chris? Yeah, I can't see so well without my glasses, but I see a blur, so I thought it might be Chris. Yeah, I should wear my glasses when I sit. I can actually see people properly, but I see kind of blurry shapes. They look like people. So are you people? Yeah, I think you are. Okay, nice to see you again, Chris. And so Venerable Ananda goes to the Buddha, and he says to the Buddha that, he says spiritual friendship. This is what I'm talking about now, being conditioned by the right people, right? He says spiritual friendship, Kalyanamitta, is half of the holy life. Yeah, and I remember when I first read that, I thought, yeah, sure, it's half the holy life. Yeah, you're exaggerating. What do you mean half the holy life? There's all this other stuff you have to do. Eightfold Path. Doesn't even mention Kalyanamitta in the Eightfold Path. That's 8 factors right there. So surely if it's like 10%, that will be a maximum. But of course, there is something profound going on here. And now that you understand this idea of conditioning, you understand why that idea of Kalyanamitta is so absolutely fundamental. And so the Buddha says to Ananda, he says, actually, no, it is not half the spiritual life. Kalyanamitta, spiritual friendship, is everything in the holy life. It is 100%. And now you know why. The reason why is because everything comes from that. Everything emerges from that. That is the circuit breaker. The circuit breaker that stops our conditioning and reconditions us in a new direction. Without that circuit breaker, our conditioning just carries on. Our conditioning just kind of follows on from before, and there's nothing to break it. And so our habits from the past, the way we have been conditioned through lifetimes or whatever it might be, it just carries on, without anything to say, actually, maybe you should look somewhere else for true happiness, for liberation, for understanding, and all of these kind of things. So this is that very beautiful idea. And many other places in the sutta as the word of the Buddha, you see how the spiritual path starts with that word of the wise people, the hanging out with the superior people called the Sappurisa in the suttas. So that is a very interesting idea. So how can we make that work? How can we kind of get closer to that in our ordinary practice? How can we kind of make the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, how can we make that influence more how we live our life? And recently I have been talking a little bit about one of these words that you find in the suttas. I talked about this at Bodhinyana Monastery during the Rains retreat, because we went through a sutta called the Ratana Sutta. The Ratana Sutta is the sutta on gems, the Gem Sutta. And of course in Buddhism we have 3 gems, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So it is basically a sutta on the 3 gems and the 3 qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And so I was talking about the Dhamma. So I feel sorry now for Venerable Sagga. He has to hear all of these things again. Sorry, Venerable, I apologize, but you are here, so you had to bear up with it. It's a little bit of suffering, but for a good cause. So, so the Dhamma has, the way it is talked about in the suttas, it has all these attributes. And one of the attributes of the Dhamma, this is how it is qualified. We have the famous verse in the Pali language, Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sandittiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanaiko. Opanaiko. This is this word we're talking about now. Opanaiko. What does that mean? Because when you go through these words, you start to understand that these words often are quite profound. They have a very kind of specific meaning that the Buddha is trying to bring out. When the Buddha tells you that this is how the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, is to be understood, then he qualifies the Dhamma in these ways. It makes it very important to reflect on what these things actually are. What do they really mean? And the word Opanaika is often translated and rendered in various ways in the suttas. So you find Opanaika being translated as moving onwards, or leading onwards. You find it translated as something like applicable or relevant and these kind of things. But the main meaning of Upanaika is something that leads you towards something else, leads you to. And of course, in the Dhamma, what it leads you to, are all the qualities that we try to develop or achieve through our Dhamma practice. Which is an end of suffering, of course, happiness, contentment, love, compassion, forgiveness, understanding, all of these beautiful qualities that we're trying to develop on this path. That is what the Dhamma leads you to. And so the Dhamma leads you to these things. And that is kind of very interesting, because that is often not how we lead our lives. We don't lead our lives as if the Dhamma leads us to these things. We lead our lives as if we lead ourselves to these things. You know what I mean? You think that you decide, I will practice the Dhamma. You think you decide, I will be kind. You think you decide, I will be generous. You think you decide, I will come to Dhammaloka Center this evening. Oh no, you didn't decide that. You are here because of external forces, circumstances and conditions. You have no idea why you're here tonight. Maybe you better leave before it's too late. So that is the problem. And so if it feels, the ego kind of comes in, and the ego takes ownership of all of these things and says, I did this, I am responsible. Why? Because I am important, I am great. Everyone wants to feel great, everyone wants to feel important. The ego demands a certain respect and a certain kind of grandiosity. That's the nature of the ego. But what the Buddha is saying is that no, it is not you that practice this path. What practices this path is the Dhamma. The Dhamma is what leads you onwards. It's the Dhamma that leads you towards the goal, not you. And that is kind of extraordinarily interesting. Because it kind of changes the way we think about all of this. What we need to do is get the I out of the way. Because the I is a nuisance. The I is blind. The I doesn't know where it's coming from. The I comes from this conditioning in the past, from these long habits that we had for lifetimes or whatever, building up in various ways. Now it takes one shape, now the ego has another shape. But actually it is blind. The Dhamma doesn't have any wisdom. The Dhamma is just the sum total of all the conditioning from the past. And if there's a bit of wisdom in the past, maybe it will have a bit of wisdom. But if there's no wisdom in the past, it's got no wisdom at all. But of course, it does think it has wisdom, and that is the problem. And so part of the Dhamma is to get the I out of the way. It is not just the I that you get out of the way. And this is why we're talking about here, a follow-up on the Dhamma talk for 2 weeks ago about no choice, or no free will, because that's the similar idea of getting the I out of the way, the idea, the beautiful Buddhist idea of non-self, of not having an inherent essence or whatever. And so you get the I out of the way. But it's not just the I that you get out of the way. It is also the other things that drive us in the world, of course, are all our habits. All the habits that we have from the past. So the Dhamma, again, as I mentioned before, is the thing that short-circuits those habits, that makes it possible for us to emerge from those habits and take a new direction. If the Dhamma wasn't there, we'd just forever being caught up in that stream, the stream of habits, the stream of samsara, always going downhill. You know that simile in the suttas about the stream going downhill? You know where that stream ends? It ends in a pool. In that pool, according to the sutta, there's sharks, crocodiles, not freshies but salties. And it doesn't say that in the sutta. It doesn't make distinction. It just says crocodiles. Crocodiles, whirlpools, waves. That's kind of what you find in that pool. So if you continue in the samsaric kind of flow of things, you end up in those whirlpools. So you don't want that. You don't want to carry on with those habits from the past because they are incredibly unreliable and uncertain. And so that's what mindfulness does. And of course, many of those habits from the past are just defilements. They are just desires and ill will and confusion and stupidity and all of these things that are kind of caught up in our minds that we cannot really disentangle from. This is what this is about. And so all of these things, including the sense of self is also just a habit from the past, really. All of these things flow us forward. And we need now instead to tune into the Dhamma, to allow the Dhamma to lead us, to allow the Dhamma to express itself through our conduct, through our speech, through how we think, through how we perceive, through how we live our lives. And if you can allow the Dhamma to become the source through which you express yourself, then you have really got it all made. Then you are going to be on the dry ground. And this is what this idea of Upanayika is about. It's the Dhamma that leads you, and that, or at least ideally, that is what it should do. So this has important consequences for our lives. How can we do that more? How can we get closer to this idea of allowing the Dhamma to drive us rather than to allow the self to drive us? How is that possible? Because you may think, well, myself is there. How can I not get these things kind of caught up in each other? How is it possible to allow the Dhamma to come out? And I will give you some ideas about how you can actually do that, how we can allow the problems to calm down and to kind of fade away, and allow the Dhamma to come to the forefront, and put the Dhamma in the driver's seat. The driver's seat. You know that simile of Ajahn Brahmali with the driverless bus? You know that one? Has anyone not heard about the simile of the driverless bus? Everyone has heard of the simile of the driverless bus. You haven't? Okay, one over there. Okay, good. Another one over there. Okay, there's a few of you. Okay, good. So like a simile of the driverless. This is one of Ajahn Brahmali's homemade similes. You don't find this in the word of the Buddha because there were no buses at the time of the Buddha, right? So there's no driverless bus in the suttas. And so Ajahn Brahmali has this beautiful simile, and this kind of fits in with this. And I'm now going to be so rude and so kind of, be a really kind of disciple who kind of goes too far, but I'm going to extend Ajahn Brahmali's simile, okay? So are you ready for this? I'm going to be so... Please don't tell Ajahn Brahmali, this stays in this room, otherwise I get into serious trouble if I start kind of taking liberties with Ajahn Brahmali's similes. So according to the simile, the simile is of this person sitting in a bus, and he sits in this bus, and then he kind of, enjoying the trip, and then suddenly as he's enjoying, or she is enjoying this trip, the bus driver starts to take the bus into this terrible place. It's really terrible country. Everything is really ugly. The forest is bad. It's all burnt down. There's kind of waste on the side of the road. Everything is really awful. And so you sit in your seat and you shout at the bus driver, "Hurry up! Get us out of this place. It's terrible to be here. I don't want to be in this place any longer." And what does the bus driver do? Slows down. This is kind of the bus driver in the simile of the driverless bus. And then after a while, finally, after kind of slowing down for a while, going through this for hours and hours and hours through this terrible country, you know what life is like? Sometimes a lot of suffering in life, right? And when you want to get out of suffering, can you get out of it? No, it drags on, right? It goes on and on and on. You know what I mean? It's never too short. Suffering is never too short, always too long. It drags on like that. And if you shout at the driver in your mind, it doesn't help. It makes it worse. It slows down. And then after a while, eventually you get out of that suffering because things are always up and down. Yeah, and eventually you come to the happy, beautiful, you're coming onto Cottesloe Beach. Yeah, when you drive down on the beautiful sunny day, you drive along kind of the foreshore, Cottesloe Beach, you look at the beautiful beach down there. I got to say, Perth has some of the best beaches in the world. I got to say, it's pretty impressive. I have actually walked on those beaches. I try to walk at times when it's kind of not so many people. They're like in the early morning in the winter is usually a good time to walk on those beaches. And then you're sitting on this, you're driving on this bus, along Cottesloe Beach or all the other beaches down there. And then you say, wow, this is so beautiful. And then you shout to the bus driver, slow down, for goodness sake. Yeah, I want to see the view here. I want to see the ocean and the sand and kind of the beautiful dunes in front of it. Slow down. What does the driver do? Hurries up. Yeah, goes faster, goes out to Cottesloe Beach and ends up some other dodgy place like, I was going to say Nolamara, but I shouldn't say that. This is even better, right? Let's face it, this is the best place. If you come here, you should really slow down. And that is what our happy times sometimes are in life. Yeah, we have the happy times, and the happy times don't last long enough. And before you know it, they're gone. And then you're back to the dukkha again, back to the toxic waste dumps and all that kind of stuff. And so then after a while, you get so fed up with this blooming bus driver, who never does what he's told. Actually, I'm not sure. Has anyone ever tried to shout at the bus driver? Probably not a good idea. So I'm not sure if the simile actually is a very real-life simile. You probably get kicked off the bus pretty quickly. But so eventually you get so fed up with this bus driver, you go up to the driver's seat. You're going to really tell that bus driver off. This is how you should drive your bus driver. And what happens when you come to the bus driver's seat? There is no one there. That is why the bus driver never responded. It's an empty seat. And this is this idea, that there is no free will. This is the idea that there's no one there in charge. The bus just drives according to its own cause and conditions. So then you go back to your seat. And you still kind of look out of the window, but you stop shouting at the bus driver. You accept whatever is going on because you understand this is the nature of existence. It is like this. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you suffer. So what is the extension of that simile? And the extension of that simile is that instead of having no one in the driver's seat, we should try to put the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, in that driver's seat. That is what we should be doing. And now I'm going to tell you how to do that. Because when you put the Dhamma in that driver's seat, this is the idea of the Dhamma leading you on, then the bus goes by itself in the right direction. So what can we do? And there's two things that we should do to be able to put the Dhamma in the driver's seat. And the first one is, none of these things are going to be very kind of surprising to you, I think, unless you are fairly new to this Buddha Center. But one of them is obviously mindfulness, because mindfulness gives you the awareness, it gives you the ability to make choices. And the other one is right view, the right view of the Buddha, which then informs you and points you in the right direction. So how can we use these two things? Well, mindfulness, again, is this quality of the mind that allows you to take a new course. Without mindfulness, without awareness what is going on, we're just going to carry on in the same old way as we always have carried on. There's nothing to kind of help us deviate, to take a new course, because we are trapped by all of these causes and conditions. So mindfulness says, okay, wait, am I doing the right thing? It stops you. It holds you. It allows you to change your course. That does not mean that there is free will. It doesn't mean that at all. What it means is that there is another condition coming into your will. Before, your will was completely driven by cause and conditions in the past. Now it is also driven by that mindfulness, by the ability to stop. So you stop, and you ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? Is this what I should be doing? And sometimes you will know, a lot of the time you will know intuitively, what I'm doing is fine, it's not a problem, you just carry on. But sometimes you may wonder whether what you're doing is optimal or not. Am I really doing what I really optimizing my practice of the spiritual path or not? So those times when you have a bit of doubt about that, very often all you have to do is like wait in the present. Like Ajahn Brahma says, don't wait in the future, wait in the present. Is one of Ajahn Brahma's famous kind of catchphrases. And he is very good at coming up with catchphrases, I have to say. Sometimes he has these really nice ones. We should have a whole book of Ajahn Brahma catchphrases. So he says, wait in the present. And very often when you wait, it is as if that Dhamma intuition is there, just under the surface. Very often. And it will guide you in the right direction, almost automatically. If you just bring the mindfulness to the table, it almost happens by itself. Stop, wait, what am I doing now? I shouldn't, best not to talk like that, Best not to act like that. Well, why am I getting so upset? Okay, let me find another way of doing this. And so you guide, things change, simply through the act of mindfulness. Another way, if you feel more trapped in your defilements or the problems that you have, is to ask yourself, well, what would a Buddha have done in this situation? It might be a very difficult situation, you may be trapped into something. What would a Buddha have done in this situation? That is a beautiful way of bringing the Buddha into your life, and asking yourself that deep wisdom of this extraordinary spiritual teacher, the greatest spiritual master in human history. What would he have done? And if you can emulate the Buddha, good on you, because that is really what this path is about, emulating the greatest spiritual masters in human history. So try, what did the Buddha do? What would the Buddha have done? And if the Buddha is too remote for you, it's hard for you to maybe relate to the Buddha, and I can appreciate that might be difficult for people. Well, who is your favorite other person who you have a lot of respect for because of the profound spiritual qualities? Maybe Ajahn Brahm, What would Ajahn Brahm have done? Don't ask that when you come to the lunch table. Because if you ask what Ajahn Brahm would have done at the lunch table, you're going to take the wrong kind of food, So don't ask, that's the wrong time to ask. But when it comes to moral questions, that's when we should ask, what would Ajahn Brahm have done? And what would Ajahn Brahm have done? He would have been gentle, he wouldn't tell anyone off, he would have thoughts of kindness and compassion, it's kind of obvious. Or who is your other favorite spiritual? Ajahn Hasapanya from Dhammasara Monastery, Or whoever it might be, some of the lay people here who also are very inspiring. How would they have acted? And in this way, you give yourself this guidance, possibility of seeing things in a different way. You're short-circuiting this. Or it can just be, what about the Dhamma? What does the Dhamma have to say in this particular case? And maybe you remember the Dhamma. You have some verses in your mind or something you knew the Buddha said, and you allow that to guide you instead. This is what mindfulness does to you, helps you. It reminds you how you should actually live your life in this way. But what you will find is that very often mindfulness is not enough. And the reason mindfulness is not enough is because sometimes we are just too confused. We are too uncertain. We don't really know what is going on. We don't have enough input from the Dhamma to really be able to see what is right or what is wrong. Sometimes our defilements have so overpowered our mind that our mindfulness is completely distorted and biased, and we think that bad things are good and good things are bad, and we got everything upside down. We think black is white and white is black and up is down and left is right, etc. So we are completely confused. And this is actually pretty much taken from the suttas. The Buddha says that we tend to see the world kind of in completely opposite from the way we should see it. So we need something more. We need something behind that mindfulness to empower it. And that other thing which comes behind mindfulness and empowers it is right view. is seeing the world as it actually is, not as we want it to be, or as our defilements filter it to be, but as it actually is, as the Buddha taught is the nature of the world. And when we are informed by the wisdom of the Buddha, by the understanding that the Buddha have the world, then we have the right foundation for making good decisions, for saying the right thing, for living with kindness, living with care, living with compassion, living with all of these good qualities that I think everyone here understand are so important for having a fulfilling and good life and also a positive future. So right view is the critical one. And I will show you why right view is so powerful. This is a simile I've taught you before, but I think it's a beautiful simile to kind of show you that right view actually is more important than mindfulness to make good decisions. Mindfulness is talked about all the time in Buddhist circles. Be mindful and she'll be right. Yeah, that's kind of the idea in Australia at least. Yeah. She'll be right. Be mindful and then you can make the good. But actually it's not as simple as that. Very often mindfulness is not enough. And I will show you now why that is the case. And this is the simile I use of when you want to cross a road. Yeah, I've talked it here before, and you may have heard it before, but I'm going to say it again. And the idea here is when you come to a very busy street, like St. George's Terrace or whatever down in the city, and you come to this busy street, and there's two kind of 4 lanes, two lanes of car going one way, 2 lanes going the other way, and you have to cross St. George's Terrace. What do? Do you look left and right, or do you just walk straight into the traffic without looking? Nobody, very, very few people, unless you are suicidal, will just walk into the street like that, because if you do that, very likely you will die, because the traffic, especially in the middle of the day, is just so high down in the center of the city. And so any sensible person will look left and right when they go down there. And it doesn't matter how little mindfulness you have, The idea I'd like to use is the idea of someone using a mobile phone, because everyone seems to be using mobile phones all the time these days. I think it's a scourge on society. Does anyone agree with me about that? You can't talk to people anymore. People are just kind of in their phone. You can't even get eye contact with anyone. It's like they hide. It's almost like if people are getting more shy, more afraid, I think, of other people. We need a bit more, contact, I think, sometimes. Anyway, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but anyway, that's kind of my idea. Maybe it's time that I kind of left the scene and kind of passed it on to some younger generation here. But regardless of how much you come with your mobile phone, if you're texting to your mate, so you're kind of taking a video of yourself as you're walking down the street, live streaming to your friends or whatever you're doing, or watching something or whatever it is that's going on, TikTok or whatever, even then, even you have almost virtually no mindfulness at all, when you come to St. George's Terrace, you are going to look left and right, So mindfulness there is not the critical thing that makes you look left and right. What makes you look left and right is right view. The view that this is dangerous. That is the right view in this situation. And that right view is so powerful, is so strong, it's so embedded in your mind. Since you were a toddler, you were told by your parents, don't run into the streets. It's so embedded in your mind that when you come to that street, even if you have zilch mindfulness, zip, zero, nada mindfulness, still you're going to look left, you're going to look right, left, right, maybe many times before you walk into that street. And that shows you that actually what is really powerful is the view that you have and not the mindfulness. Or rather, to be precise, it is the mindfulness that arises through that view at that particular time. That is what is important. And so this is what we need also in our ordinary life, is to strengthen that view. Understanding what is truly dangerous in the world, what is really problematic, And as we understand that, as we align our values with the values that the Buddha said are really important and significant and we should have in our lives, as we do that, we start to get this sense that certain things are dangerous, certain things we should not be doing, certain things are going to be problematic, and that is this idea that we have here. So what is that right view. And a very important part of that right view is, of course, the idea of impermanence. There's many aspects to this right view, but one of the simple ones, the ones that we can everyone can relate to a good extent, is impermanence, because we can see in our lives quite clearly that things are always changing. Nothing really lasts. Things come to an end, and before you know it, it's all gone. Yeah, this is kind of very obvious to us. And so the more you reflect on the idea of impermanence, unreliability, uncertainty, the more you start to see the danger in this world. What's going to happen around the corner? What's going to happen tomorrow? Am I going to leave this hall being carried out because I'm dead? Or am I going to walk out by myself tonight? This is what I mean by impermanence. It happens so quickly. It happens before. Suddenly, out of the blue, these things happen. And it doesn't matter how old you are. We think that when we are in our 20s or teens or 30s, whatever, that we have a long life ahead of us. No guarantee at all you're going to have a long life ahead of you. You may feel that way, but those feelings are very uncertain and unreliable. And so the idea of impermanence is this feeling that the world is kind of on this tectonic plate that is always moving, always waiting for the next earthquake to arise, waiting for kind of impermanence to come into your life, and suddenly things change. We are very bad at predicting the future. We don't understand impermanence. We don't understand how unreliable the world is. This has actually been proved scientifically. We can see the past. We can see how we have changed from what we were 10 years ago to what we are now. But if you ask someone to predict what they will be like in 10 years, we can't predict that. We think we will basically be the same. We cannot see impermanence in the future. We are blinded by the illusion of the self, which in part is the idea of free will. And so by understanding impermanence, by understanding unreliability, by understanding how uncertain everything is, by understanding that the Buddhism itself is dying out, that conditioning from the Buddha is also very uncertain. All of these things are so unreliable. It starts and makes us understand that time is very short. It gives us a sense of urgency. Now is the time to practice. Now is the time to do the right thing. Now is the time to be kind, to be caring, to be compassionate, to be forgiving, to let go of the past, to be wise, to live our life to a higher level. Don't kind of cling on to all the stupidity. Cling on to some of those good things instead. And eventually you overcome clinging altogether by doing that. This is the right way. And as you practice, do this, as you get that right view, understanding the uncertainty and the urgency of the practice start to hit home. Then, of course, when you come to St. George's Terrace, when you meet another person, and you can either be nasty or you can be kind, you stop. Right view says, this is my opportunity to be kind. Let me be kind. The opportunities are so few. It is urgent to do the right thing. Now is the time to do the right thing. That is how it feels like. This is the power of right view. It informs your mindfulness and it allows you to do things in the right way. So this is the idea of imbuing our life with right view, by remembering kind of what really is really what matters in our life, giving us that sense of urgency. Now, one way of doing that, I just talked about the idea of impermanence. And the idea of impermanence is very interesting, and it's very broad. It really touches on all the various aspects of life. But one way of kind of summarizing the idea of impermanence in a very simple way, which every one of you here can use, is to remember the idea of death. You are going to die, and you don't know when. And because you don't know when, you have to be ready to die now. Now is the only time you can be ready to die. And if you're not ready now, chances are you will not be ready when it actually happens. So this is the idea, right? So death kind of brings together all the various strands of impermanence. Because when you die, everything has to go. The whole world disappears. Everything in your life that has had value to you, that you are attached to, that is dear to you, that is important to you, all of those things have to go. So it kind of brings together all the various kinds of impermanence in one moment or one process, which is the process of dying. So death contemplation, reminding yourself every morning when you wake up, I could die today. Are you ready for that? Some people think, what, are you nuts? That's not the first thing I want to think about in the morning, thinking about death. You've got to be crazy. Actually, no, it sets the pace, it sets the foundation for a very beautiful day if you do that. Because it reminds you to be kind, it reminds you to be caring, it reminds you to treat people well. It's a very, very good way to start the day. Yeah. Today I could die. I got to live in a good way. So this is one of those contemplations that the Buddha talks about. That is in the suttas. It is said to be one of the 5 kind of very important contemplations in life that we're all supposed to be doing. These are called the 5 themes in the suttas. Yeah, and so this is one of those 5 themes. And if you practice this theme, theme of the Dhamma, the Buddha says it actually leads you to awakening. It leads you. It says to the how does it go now? To the arising of the path. And the arising of the path means you become a stream entry through that contemplation of death. It's a very, very powerful contemplation if you take it all the way to its kind of logical conclusion, if you like. So this is a way of dealing with that, and having a simple idea of right view. And that right view is something we can all relate to. We all know that must be true. And that even though sometimes it feels like we could live forever, we know that's a delusion, obviously. So that is something we can actually work on very easily. So this is how to use, to kind of imbue our decision-making with the Dhamma, right view, building it up. And then as we go through our day, instead of our ego taking charge, instead of our ego taking credit for everything we do, we just stop, we are patient, we listen for the Dhamma in our heart. And because we have built up mindfulness, because we have built up right view, the Dhamma kind of comes out by itself. And we know the right procedure, we know the right tack, we know the right direction in which we should move. This is kind of how this works. But this also works when it comes to meditation practice. And this is kind of the area where in some ways it may be the most powerful in a way to allow the Dhamma to guide your meditation. I was always really baffled by Ajahn Brahmali. I always like to talk about Ajahn Brahmali, the way he taught meditation in the early days. I've been a monk at Bodhidharma Monastery for 30 years. You think it's a long time? Ajahn Brahmali has been there for 40 years, so for over 41 years or whatever. So when I first came, this is what I call the early days. I mean, it's just a random thing to say, but it was early days for me, I suppose. And you go to Ajahn Brahmali and you say, oh yeah, my meditation is going like this. I would like it to go better. What should I do? And Ajahn Brahmali always gave the same advice. He said, sit longer. There was always that advice, sit longer. You haven't sat long enough yet. And I used to think, what is he talking about? What does it mean? Sometimes I sit longer, it doesn't really work. It gets worse after a while, sit longer. Yeah? What on earth does he mean by sit longer? Sounds more like more dukkha. It's supposed to be sukha, happiness, this part. Not so much dukkha. There's dukkha left, right, and center as far as I'm concerned. And it took me a long time to really kind of fully grasp what Ajahn Brahmali was talking about. And what he's talking about is this idea that when you have the Dhamma in your heart, the Dhamma guides you in your meditation. The Dhamma leans the mind in the right direction. And because of that, you just have to wait. And as the Dhamma leans the mind in the right direction, helps you to basically do what you need to do, it just happens by itself. Of course, the downside is if you haven't got enough Dhamma in your heart, well, then you have a problem, right? Because then there's no guidance there. Then you're kind of all over the place. It doesn't really bring you any closer to the goal of peace or happiness or whatever. And so it needs that Dhamma inside. And so the point here, because meditation is supposed to be easy, meditation is not supposed to be driven by the will. Na chetanaya karaniya. This cannot be done by an act of the will, says the Buddha in the Chaitanya Sutta. Meditation cannot be driven by the will. Why? Because it's dhammata. It happens according to nature. And if it doesn't happen according to the will, if it happens according to nature, well, then that nature has to be in place, the right nature. And the right nature is the Dhamma. The Dhamma is what should guide you, not the willpower. So you wait, you feel the Dhamma inside. You have been pre-programmed by the teachings of the Buddha, by other skilled meditators, and then your mind kind of goes in the right direction. And all you have to do is wait. And as you wait, the mind calms down. As you wait, the bliss in the mind starts to arise. And eventually, as you keep on waiting in this way, eventually you go all the way to samadhi itself. All you have to do is wait and allow that Dhamma to take charge in your practice. It's easy to say. It is not always so easy to do, because the reality is that the ego will tend to sneak in there and take charge and take credit for what is going on. But don't believe that ego. Instead, try, if you can, just to be mindful and just to wait and just to be aware, and allow the process to happen by itself. And if you do that, it is so beautiful because it's so easy. It is so delightful. There's no striving. We strive too much in this blooming world. Everyone is striving, to get somewhere, to do things, to kind of exert ourselves. We get fed up with all this striving. I'd like to relax, please. Well, this is the highest kind of relaxation, when you do it in this particular way. And what is quite interesting, and it just occurred to me just a couple of days ago, that actually this whole idea, this kind of trajectory of how meditation works, it actually has a direct reference to it in the suttas, a direct similarity in how it is expressed by the Buddha himself. And this is found in what is known as the 7 factors of awakening, the Satta Sambojjhanga. And according to the 7 factors of awakening, they start off with a mindfulness factor of awakening. You are mindful. This is what I've been talking about now. You have to be mindful, you have to be aware, because if you're not aware, then the habits will just always be in charge, and there's no opportunity for the Dhamma to cut through the habits and to be in charge instead. So you need the mindfulness first of all. And then from this mindfulness factor of awakening comes the investigation of qualities factor of awakening, the Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. That arises from that, investigation of qualities. If you have that awareness, the mind automatically investigates what is good and bad. The mind automatically moves you in the right direction. The mind automatically remembers the teaching of the Buddha. Part of the Dhamma Vichaya is the contemplation of the Dhamma, which is the teachings of the Buddha. And so through that mindfulness, the mind is able to take or make the right decisions as a consequence of its understanding of the Dhamma, following the word of the Buddha. So it's right there in the 7 factors of awakening. And the consequence of those following those 7 factors of awakening, the next factor of awakening is energy, virya. The next one after that is piti, which is joy. The next one after that is passaddhi, which is tranquility. All of these things arise out of this process. If you just wait with mindfulness, allowing the Dhamma to guide you in the right way, the energy comes, the joy comes, then the joy, then the tranquility comes. And eventually from that tranquility comes the deep stages of meditation that are known as samadhi and jhana on the Buddhist path. This is how they come about, by listening to the Dhamma, by allowing the Dhamma to be in charge, putting the ego to one side, getting the sense of self out of the way, allowing the process to happen by itself. Okay. So that is that little talk for you this evening. So there you are. Yeah. Okay, so if there are any questions or whatever, now is your chance. Eddie, surprise, surprise. Bill, if there are any non-regulars who want to ask questions, maybe give it to them first, and the regulars can go towards the end, because I'm sometimes concerned that the new people don't get a chance to ask questions if they have questions. So, please.
Thank you. Yes, I am still very new to this, but I just wanted to highlight as well, when we're looking at things like whether there's free will or not, I don't think it's just enough to accept it. I think that there's basically emotional attachments that the mind can put on that leads some people to interpret that kind of conclusion in different ways. And I hope it's not too heavy for me to share in an environment like this, but I can see the difference between myself, who's come to accept that level of lack of agency for as a means of liberation. In terms of some of the trauma that I've had to deal with in the past, it's been a lot easier now to just look at it as something that just there wasn't any other way. Yeah. And it would be very easy for someone else to take a different conclusion, where they can sit and ponder why this happened and look into all these different streams of possibilities. And that's something that is recommended for a certain stage of trauma therapy, to construct narratives. But after kind of sitting on it for a bit, it's just a point where the narratives don't feel all that helpful. And it feels like instead that, like, with a combination of mindfulness, I can choose to stop asking these questions that I'm never going to get an answer to.
Right.
And with metta meditation as well, I think is another important component to this, because once I stop asking questions that I know I'm not going to get an answer to and stop ruminating, it leaves a bit of a void where I can find self-compassion arising out of it, rather than just continually sitting in this, oh, this happened to me because of these reasons, or whatever mental construction. So I think it's been something of a real success from my perspective, in terms of accepting it and not attaching, that kind of fatalism where it could turn into, oh, well, it was something that just had to happen and I was completely powerless, and it meant that it's all these kind of, like you point out, egoistic kind of, because the ego, like some people interpret it as only possible for the ego to be grandiose, but it's also very capable of being very, very self-malicious.
True.
But I think, I just wanted to highlight again the all those components, but also what you didn't mention was the metta, and I think that's also another important part of this.
Of course, absolutely. Okay, no, all good points. Yes, I think kind of ruminating over the past is kind of a fool's game, to do, at least maybe a little bit, but not too much, because there is no end to ruminating in the past. Sometimes you hear about psychologists using the problems of, they will say that everything is caused, all the problems are caused by your childhood or by your parents or whatever. It's kind of a very common idea in psychology even now. But of course, from Buddhist point of view, that's completely wrong. And it goes back into the unfathomable past, really, all that conditioning. And the beautiful thing about seeing the non-self nature of the will, the lack of free will, is that it also becomes possible, forgiveness becomes possible and all of that. Because very often, if there is free will, we can either blame ourselves or we blame others. But the moment you really understand that conditioning, forgiveness suddenly becomes a very, very large possibility. You realize how we are all kind of almost railroaded onto doing what we do. And then we can let go of so much guilt and so much shame, and we can let go of other people's blaming others and all of these kind of things. It becomes a very beautiful thing as a consequence. But one also has to be, even though you then see that conditionality in the past doesn't mean that you see the future as determined either. It means that you understand the danger of that conditionality, and so you make sure that you have the right conditions for the future. That's a very important point as well in this whole thing. So even though you feel, okay, in the past maybe I was trapped in a certain way, you also come to realize that actually the future is not fixed because of that. The future is what I make now. I create it now by being mindful, by following a good way of life, maybe guided by the Buddha, whatever it might be. So so there's lots and lots of things to be said about this. And the other thing is that we should also, I think that's where you started out, you're talking about, you have to be careful using these ideas in the wrong way. And one of the ways is to get fatalistic and thinking that we have no power in the world. That's completely the wrong way of thinking about the idea of lack of free will. From a very practical perspective, sometimes it feels like we have free will, and sometimes you go with that feeling. Okay, now I have the choice to do this or that. Sometimes the sense of self-will makes its way into our choices. Sometimes we just can't get rid of it. The sense of self is so tied up with who we are and our conditioning from the past. It's impossible to live a life for an ordinary person without that sense of self kind of seeping into our decisions. And so then because of that, well, you say, okay, if my sense of self is going to be there, well, at least, that sense of self, I will use it to make the best possible decisions, because very often you have no choice in the matter, it's going to be there anyway. And so we sometimes we do act as if we have free will, because the sense of self is kind of there. So important not to be too idealistic and to understand what actually works and what is kind of conceivable can be done on this path there. Okay. So please try to keep your questions a little bit shorter, otherwise it's going to take a long time. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have a question about the monasteries. So what's the protocol if one monk has a resentment at another monk?
Yeah.
Like, do they sort of sort it out between the monks, or do they go to the head abbot? Is there like an HR of the monk? Like what's this? How do you sort of mentally go through that process of sorting out? Because that's more relevant to you and sort of,
Yeah. Well, in the end, these things are just, there isn't any kind of very absolute rules about that. So usually you will, those two monks will try to sort it out between them. Usually that would be the first step. And if they
do any of the monks like gossip about other monks and sort of like stir up trouble at the monastery? And has it ever escalated? Has there ever been any punch-ups or anything like?
Punch-ups?
Anything in
you
like
mean in
name calling?
You mean in our monastery or the monasteries there?
Bodhinyana.
Bodhinyana monastery.
I've
never seen a punch-up in Bodhinyana monastery here. Yeah. I think it's very unlikely. But remember that, monastic life is just a microcosm of the world at large, so you can expect people to be similar. They may be more idealistic, they may be trying their best to kind of live a better life, but you can expect to see similar kind of things, yeah? It's not kind of, you don't become suddenly, you don't change and become radically different the moment you put on brown robes and shave your head. It doesn't it doesn't have any direct psychological impact on you just doing that. And so people are people, and so they are going, okay, there will be misunderstandings, there will be problems there like everywhere else. But punch-ups, no, that's not very common. Yeah, I've never. It's remarkably harmonious. You'd be surprised how harmonious it actually is, and it's kind of generally, considering that you're living together, it's kind of quite extraordinary. But it's not really the abbot, because the monasteries don't actually have abbots. Yeah, really. I mean, because the idea of abbot is a Christian concept, Christian monasteries. Buddhist monasteries are it's the Sangha. The Sangha is the group of monastics coming together. That they are the authority that rule the affairs of the monastic order. So all the monks if there's a problem, all the monks ideally come together. In reality, they will often go to Ajahn Brahmali and say, Ajahn, please help, dukkha, daddy Ajahn. So that because, Ajahn Brahmali is a very kind and compassionate and wise person, and so he will kind of very often be able to help out and do something. So it's just like society. You do what you can. You try to sort things out. Yeah, you try not to allow things to fester for too long. But sometimes it is very complicated and very difficult to resolve. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ajahn, thank you for your talk. My question is, having the Dhamma lead your life, so from what I understand, it's the Eightfold Path. I sort of understand it through right intention, so be kind, be gentle. And my question is about applying it particularly as a layperson from the intention of renunciation. I can understand be kind, be gentle, but in everyday life as a layperson, it can be complicated. You have a wife who's not spiritual, so it's like, how far can you take renunciation as a layperson? I understand as a monk, you can take it to pretty far level.
So renunciation comes in degrees, right? So you have to kind of take the baby steps first of all, and the baby steps are things like keeping the 5 precepts. Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of renunciation, because you're renouncing those pleasures that break the precepts. Yeah, so that's already the beginning. So start with renouncing, immorality and doing things that goes against the 5 precepts. Next thing to renounce is to renounce those thoughts that lead you to endless problems. Renounce anger, renounce ill will, renounce those things that cause large problems in your mind and in your life and your social life, your relationships with other people, etc., etc. So renounce that. And then, eventually, this really depends on how far you want to take the Buddhist path. But, if you are interested in just living a simple life, you can kind of live a more contented existence, just live in a fairly simple place, not kind of aspire for too much worldly wealth and worldly goods, understanding that there is no end to those aspirations anyway, and they don't even make you all that happy. That's the reality of it. Yeah, it's actually, sometimes being really wealthy can be extremely miserable and isolating and all these kind of things. And so you kind of move towards the idea of contentment and happiness. That's another kind of stage in renunciation. So you see renunciation in various areas where you can apply them like that. Yeah.
What about like reducing sensual pleasures, like watching too many movies or whatever, that kind of thing too? And would that affect meditation in a lot of ways? Or?
Yeah, well, but just look at what happens in your mind in meditation and you will know for yourself, yeah? If you see that movie replaying in your mind, we know it has an effect, yeah? Sometimes it does, right? The movies kind of come back, flashbacks in a meditation, because they have a very powerful impact on us. That's kind of just the reality of it. But, don't try to do things fairly naturally. Yeah, if you feel that you want to give it up and it feels natural and it feels like a waste of time to watch kind of movies for no purpose, you could be reading a sutta instead, right? Or you could be doing something really. You can maybe meditate for a while instead, or whatever it is. Then do it when it feels wrong. If you have a television in your house, then you can consider giving it up. Yeah, don't have a television, because if you don't have it, very hard to give in to the temptation. Yeah, you can't give in. So sometimes you have to make it difficult for yourself to actually access certain things, and that kind of helps you. But be wise about it, because if we try to force renunciation too much, it becomes painful. And when it becomes painful, you become even more indulgent down the track. Yeah. So find the middle way. Yeah. Okay. So Eddie, last question. Yeah. Thank you.
Ajahn Brahmali.
Yeah.
From your previous talk, tonight you're still trying to convince us that in practicing Buddhism, we are being conditioned, and that there's no free will, okay? And this time you brought in the Dhamma too, to back up, your view, the thing, okay? Yeah. Though I do understand what you mean, okay? I respect what you say, okay? Please try to understand what I'm trying to tell you too, okay? Okay. As a lay person, okay, in practicing Buddhism, I don't think I'm being conditioned, and I think I have free will to do what I want to do. In Buddhism, just give you for example, okay? For example, just the 5 precepts, okay? The 5 precepts is I undertake to observe the 5 precepts to the best of my ability. Yeah. It's not thou shalt not, If thou shalt not means I'm being conditioned and I'm there's no free will. There is free will, okay? And then in terms, also I've got a choice, the 4 stages to enlightenment. There are 4 stages for me too, You understand? I'm free to do what I want. And then you
what is your question, Eddie?
Yeah. No, what I'm trying to say is,
what is your question?
The question is, I tried. I respect what you say. Yeah. Please understand that my view, this thing, I think as a Buddhist, I'm not being conditioned, and I have free will, and I do.
What is the question?
Well, no, that's the. I'm telling you.
You have to ask questions. Otherwise, if everyone is going to make statements, we're going to be here for too long. Yeah.
But do you think what do you think of my view? Question.
Yeah, it's your view. Yeah, what can I say? That's good. So I think it goes against what the Buddha taught, to be honest with you.
And then it's good to know. I understand when you brought in the mindfulness, you brought in the right view, and like sages. These are the practice. I do practice that too. It comes naturally to me. Yeah. I don't feel that when I'm practicing mindfulness that I'm being condition or no freedom. It's just natural.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Edith. Please keep it to questions, because we can't have too many people stating things, because everyone has different opinions. We could be going for a long time. So yeah. Okay, so let's have a look from some of the questions from outside of the center here. So we have wannabe like Lee. Wannabe like Lee. Is that a name? Okay. Anyway, from Germany. Where and why did this cause and conditioning start in the first place? Thank you, Ajahn. And according to the suttas, there is no first point of the start. There's no first point of cause and conditioning. There's no first point of ignorance. There's no first point of samsaric existence. So it just goes back, and there is no starting point. And this is one of the things that makes the Dhamma in Buddhism fundamentally different from all other philosophies and all other ideas about how the world works. That there actually is no first point. And that's, to me, makes one of the things that makes Buddhism such a beautiful thing, that it actually has a very realistic view about that especially here. Okay, we have a question from Yong Ji An. Bante, the Buddha taught we are the ownership of our deeds and destiny. Isn't that contradictory to what you said about no free will? The ownership of your deeds just means that when you make kamma, you have to reap the results. But that making of the kamma, the question is, well, is that free or not? And I would say that is conditioned. So if you become a Buddhist, you are more likely to do good things because the Dhamma has conditioned you. The Dhamma has kind of led you in the right way. So that is kind of the point. So the kamma is made. The making of the kamma can either be done through free will or not, lack of free will. But regardless, it has results, and those results are what you're talking about here. When you talk about the ownership means that you have to own those results in the future. We have Shobi from the UK. How to deal with fear caused by thinking of impermanence in life. Okay, so the fear means that you just have to be gentle with yourself, and you have to kind of go slowly, and you have to kind of just gradually get used to the idea of impermanence. And I would just find that middle way somewhere where you can reflect without giving rise to unwholesome qualities. And then I would think gradually, as you get used to it, it becomes more acceptable. But don't torture yourself. Don't make it too hard. Don't drive yourself crazy by trying to think something you're not ready for. Be kind to yourself. It's a very important part of this. And then hopefully you will gradually find a way to through this. Then we have Wolfram Gabi from Germany. Dear Ajahn, what difference is there in awareness in daily activities and in meditation? Is not both meditative, like observing nature or my own doings? Thank you kindly. It's just a matter of definition. What do we mean by meditation, right? Some people will say that awareness in daily activities is meditation, but I would argue that meditation is when you sit down and you become focused. In the suttas, meditation is usually about sitting down and then being aware of your breath and allowing your mind to become peaceful, still, blissful, aware, energetic, all of these good things. What we do in daily life, to me, is more like right effort. So sati sampajanya and indriya sangvara sila, these are like right efforts. And so when you are aware in daily life, you use that awareness to guide your mind in a positive way so that you become a better person. That guidance and awareness in daily life is a very important part of the spiritual path. But personally, I don't consider that meditation practice. I think that is... that whole idea comes out of a particular reading of the Satipatthana Sutta, which I don't actually agree with. And I have discussed that at length when we have discussed meditation here in the workshops and things. And if you look it up, you should be able to find it there. Okay, everyone, that is all for tonight. So let's pay respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha.